Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 93 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowles. Joined with me is Mike Kumar. And Mike, today we've got sort of a lot to get to, but the main theme is that March is on the horizon. Just less than 2 days until the calendar turns to March. We already have a conference tournament bracket from the Atlantic Sun. But Mike, let's go into some power conference storylines here. A lot has changed. We've got teams trending up, teams trending down. Where do you want to go to first?
Yeah, I mean, this week has really showed us that March is right around the corner. We had one of the craziest finishes of the season last night in the Michigan State versus Maryland game. Michigan State completely, gave away that game coming down the stretch just to make a three-quarters court buzzer beater at Maryland to win that game. You had a crazy finish between A&M and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt got the win there. Another really fun ending to the game, Florida versus Georgia. Georgia gets a huge momentum win, and then Iowa State takes a huge loss on the road against Oklahoma State in Stillwater. So still a whole lot of uncertainty. And I think, Sean, one thing we'll probably be talking about throughout the entirety of this podcast is there's been a lot of teams that have kind of come out of nowhere in the last 3-4 weeks and are going to end up getting really impressive seeds. Some teams that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, Brigham Young, Louisville's they've been playing phenomenal basketball, and a few others, while some other teams like Baylor that we thought were going to get a 5 or 6 seed, they're eking towards the bubble. So a lot of changes in the last few weeks in the landscape of college basketball.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've seen some drastic changes this late in the year. This is my 4th year doing bracketology, and in one, I try to get a bracket out every week, and in one, the difference of 1 week, I had BYU as the first 11 seed, and the next time I had them as the final 8 seed. With almost 30 games of data, that doesn't really happen all that much. We had Iowa State on the 1 line, and they did fall to the 2, and then all of a sudden I have them as my top 4 seed now. Now, other bracketologists have them at the end of the 3 line, but still, that's a big drop at this point of the year. We have Oregon moving up and down like crazy. We have Illinois sinking. It doesn't really seem like anybody's kind of staying in the same spot except for the 2 teams at the top, and that is Auburn and Duke. Like, that's kind of been the conversation. It seems to be that those 2 teams are teams 1A and 1B. But before we kick it off and go into the conferences, who do you think the best team in the country is right now?
I think right now I got to stick with Auburn. You look at the quality of out-of-conference and the quality in-conference schedule that they've got, and they've still been able to win games night in and night out. It's really impressive. Look, I think Duke's a great team. I think they're going to compete for national championship against Auburn. But when you look at the full body of work, not only is Auburn playing the best conference in college basketball, they also had a really tough out-of-conference schedule, and they completely aced it. So for that reason, I'm going with the Auburn Tigers right now as my number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, for Duke fans, I don't think it matters all that much. Auburn's not going to the region that you want to go to.
Yeah.
So Duke will be in the East region most likely, which is in Newark, New Jersey this year. Now they got to win 2 games to get there, but the whole 1 seeds and region talks do get a little bit more interesting as you go into the 3 and the 4, and really the 5 and the 6, because Alabama has sort of taken that number 3 spot right now. They've had that for a couple of weeks, and then it's Houston that takes my 4th number 1 seed. Florida was there for a while. Florida obviously losing to Georgia, a team that wasn't in the field until after that game. Tennessee is also right there, Mike, but it seems like while 1 and 2 can be compared, 3, 4, 5, and 6 can be compared also, all 4 of which have a decent chance at a 1 seed.
Yeah. No, it's wide open right now for those last 2 number 1 seeds. There's 4 teams or 5 teams even that could really nab that. Houston, Tennessee, Alabama, those guys are right up there. But look, if Michigan State makes a run through the end of the season and they can capture the Big Ten regular season and conference championship, they're going to be in there for a 1. And St. John's, probably the outside looking in. But look, if they can finish out their season in style and then win the Big East tournament at their home floor, there's no telling that St. John's couldn't make it with only 4 losses this year. So I think there are several teams right now that could get those last 2 number 1 overall or number 1 seeds. So we'll see what happens. This is going to be an exciting end to the season. I don't think we've seen bracket this wide open in a while.
And we've mentioned on this podcast and our In a Nutshell podcast a bunch of times how weak the bubble is. Well, I think that has to do with how strong the top is. Really, the top 5 seed lines and maybe the 1 or 2 of the 6s have really solid resumes. There's a distinct cutoff. I'll say after Mississippi State, which is my second 2 seed, from like the rest of the field. Kansas has fallen off out of that, But then at the 7 line, you have teams that have been teetering in and out of the top 25 all year, in Louisville, St. Mary's, UCLA. And while just 1 seed line ahead of them is Marquette, who's near the top of the Big East, then you have Purdue, Missouri, Clemson, and Oregon, who are all competing in their conferences. So It seems like that is another line that might be too hard to overcome for the teams below it at this point in the year. Obviously, it's still all right to get a 7, 8, or 9 seed, but a lot is going to have to happen from teams that haven't really won a bunch of games in a row here. But, Mike, any thoughts on sort of this middle of the pack of the bracket right now, the home teams in the first game of the tournament, and then there'll be away teams if they do win and play in the round of 32?
Yeah, you've seen a lot over the last several years. You've seen a lot of upsets because of how stacked the bubble is, and then a couple of bid stealers get in the way that get hot, like NC State last year. Look, Sean, I don't really think there's going to be that many upsets. I think this year, I think the amount of 1s, 2s, and 3 seeds you're going to see in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 is going to be pretty high. So I think people that are going to be trying to fill out their bracket, picking up crazy upsets, look, I don't think this year's the year for it. And like you said, the bubble just keeps getting weaker and weaker. And I think there's going to be some teams like Brigham Young. I talked about them earlier. They're really on the up and coming right now. So that's a team that.
Do we lose the mic?
Ole Miss falling, Kansas falling, Illinois looks like crap. Vanderbilt is, kind of in and out, but kind of like what you were saying, I don't see a lot of great depth in the 7 through 10 or 7 through 11 line.
And really all of them have reasons to be in the tournament. You can point to a game and say, hey, look, they beat this elite team. Yeah. Vanderbilt probably did clinch their ticket yesterday with a win against Texas A&M on the road. I did this before then, so I think Vanderbilt can be closer to the 8, maybe even the 7 line at this point. But you have teams in this region that can totally play themselves out of the field with a couple losses here and maybe an upset in their conference tournament. And but they can also go and beat a quad 1 team and maybe get up to that 7 line. But I think that's the 7 through 10 group. You always see a couple of them get hot at the end of the year and get to the Sweet 16. And it doesn't really seem like that will be the case this year. Obviously, crazier things have happened. And then, Mike, you'll be glad to hear this, but I do see another pretty standard tier line after your Baylor Bears right now at the last 10 seed. I think they're significantly ahead of my 11 seed Oklahoma, and then you've got the first or the last 4 in. So again, for these last 4 in teams to feel safe about themselves, you don't want to be in the projections for Dayton. Like we saw last year, we had 3 bids stolen. So everyone who thought that we're going to Dayton, we're going to the NIT. In terms of this year, conferences that we could see a bid stealer in, the West Coast Conference, the American Conference, and then maybe the Atlantic 10. VCU would have a good resume outside of as an at-large team. I haven't really been. They've overtaken George Mason there, so they're now being compared to the other at-large team or the other automatic qualifying teams. But those would be the 3 conferences to look out for if you're looking for a bid steal situation. We didn't have any for a while. You'd have to go back a couple years to Georgetown in the Big East tournament in the bubble, and then we had NC State last year. And a couple others off the that I don't know off the top of my head, but that's a pretty quick run through of the tournament there, really. And Mike, we had a game between 2 teams that were in my last 4 in last night. Let's start here. Let's go to the SEC. Texas and Arkansas at Bud Walton Arena in Fayetteville. This was the second time they played this year. Arkansas wins game 1 at Texas. And while they were down a couple men yesterday, it's the Hogs that get the job done again. Trey Johnson tries his hardest, 39 points for the Longhorns, single-handedly carries them into overtime. But it's John Calipari's 7 players who get the job done here. Absolutely necessary for the Hogs to get this one. And you look up and they're 17-11 overall and 6-9 in the conference. And with how the bubble is like, they're looking pretty good all of a sudden, which is quite a contrast from just a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely, Sean. The month of February has really turned the clock for the Hogs. And I will say, caveat to not thinking there's going to be a whole lot of high bid teams that start to make a run in the tournament. Arkansas is certainly one of those teams that can do it. And I'll tell you, it's because of Coach Cal's experience coaching in the tournament. His players are getting more experience playing with each other, and they're coming together. You look at how hard of a schedule that the Hogs had in February. On the road to Kentucky, got a statement win, 2 wins against Texas, and then they fought tooth and nail, barely lost to Alabama, had a tight loss on the road at the number 1 team in the country in Auburn, and then had a statement win at home against Missouri. This is a very good Arkansas team, and I could very much see them making a run in the tournament. You look at their last 3 games of the season, I see them winning all 3. I think Vanderbilt's going to be a tough game on the road, but if they can get to 20-11, which I expect, I think you have to look out for Arkansas on that 7 to 8 line and see if they can do any damage getting into March Madness.
And you go through their February, and Mike, they didn't lose by double digits once.
Nope.
And we know how, especially with the quality of opponents they were playing, their numbers skyrocketed. The win-loss record might not have been amazing. I mean, it's still pretty good to go 500 in the SEC. They're not even there yet, but they win those 3 that you said, they'll be 9-9. And it just seems like that game at Rupp Arena really turned things around. They proved that was not a fluke. They beat Texas twice now, and a couple really close losses. They beat the teams they've had to beat. So you have to think that they should take care of business down the stretch here. And they go into the SEC tournament 20-11, and they're not going to be sweating one bit. They're going to be probably thinking about resting some of their players in the SEC tournament. But we're not quite there yet. Texas, on the other hand, Mike, they are going to be a very interesting case. Probably right on the cut line right now. Without doing a projection, off the top of my head, you'd have to think that they're either the last team in or the first team out. They just can't. Rodney Terry just can't seem to get this team over the line. They're down there in fourth to last, 5-10, 16-12 overall. Just seems like this group will probably have another good game. They'll probably look bad another time, and they're going to be sweating their fate on Selection Sunday. Looks pretty sure.
Yeah, you thought a couple weeks ago after they had that huge home win against Kentucky that Texas was going to be back on track. They had a whole week to get to rested and recuperated, and they'll be ready to play, and they fall flat against the worst team in the SEC. The team in the SEC that hadn't had a win in the conference season, South Carolina. They got crushed. They lost by 15 points against the worst team in the SEC. And look, I don't know, the stats on this, but Texas is right now 5-10 in conference. If they win 3 in a row and they get to 8-10 in conference, they'll be fine. But let's just say they go 6-12 in conference. They lose 2 out of their last 3. How do you put a team in the NCAA tournament that's lost 3/4 of their basketball games in conference?
And two of their remaining 3 games, Mike, one of them is against Georgia and the other Mississippi State on the road, and then Oklahoma. So 2 teams that are going to be very close to the cut line. And Mike, Oklahoma's 4-11 in the conference. A tough loss to Kentucky last night. I actually have them ahead of both Texas and Arkansas in the bracket purposes because of their strong non-conference. They have victories over, West Virginia and Gonzaga. They won Battleford Atlantis. They have 3 good wins from there. Yeah. But the seemed like Oklahoma had a chance to probably stamp their bid last night. And Mark Pope's Kentucky Wildcats go on the road and they take it 83-82. Kentucky's starting to get a couple of their guards back. Still, Jackson Robinson only playing 12 minutes. They're still missing, Lamont Butler comes back. He plays 20 minutes. But it's former Oklahoma Sooner Otega Oweh with 28, including an acrobatic layup with seconds remaining. And Kentucky gets across the line here. I thought it was a decent performance from Oklahoma. And while the record might not be so great for Kentucky at 19-9, this sort of game is the reason why they're on the 3 line right now. And Mike, I'll ask you this. This just seems like a game that Calipari's Wildcats don't win, where it's a little ugly. You're kind of up against it. Mark Pope's Kentucky team wins this game, and they're headed towards a protected seed, while Oklahoma is going to get nervous.
Yeah, look, Kentucky scored 80 points. That's kind of the MO. If Kentucky can score 80 points, there's a good chance they're going to win. If they can't, they're not going to win. But kind of what you said, this was a dirty, grimy, gritty basketball game that we have not seen Calipari pull off in years past. Mark Pope's squad got the job done. It was a very resilient team effort, and I think it was pretty cool to see Oweh's kind of take over this game playing against his former team. That was really exciting. Now, to the point of Oklahoma, they're 4-11 now, and kind of what I was looking at before with the SEC. I think right now you can confidently say that they've got 11 teams in the field, right? The top 11 teams. I think Arkansas, you can make a pretty good case that they're pretty settled in the field right now, unless they do some really ugly finish to the end of the season. But then you've got those 3 teams: Georgia, Texas, and Oklahoma. I don't think that all 3 of those teams are going to get in. It's just not going to happen where you're going to have 4
especially because they play each other.
Exactly. So, something's going to have to give. The committee's not going to throw in a team that's got 5 wins in their conference into the tournament. They're just not going to do it, especially when you've got that many players that are around the bubble. So something's going to have to give, and these teams are all playing each other, right? Texas plays Georgia. They play Oklahoma. I don't think Oklahoma and Georgia play each other, but Oklahoma still has Missouri. They've got an Ole Miss team that's been struggling that needs a big win, and they're going to be on the road in Oxford. So that's going to be a big one. We talked about Texas, Oklahoma to finish off the season, and then Georgia. Georgia just had their huge statement win. They've got, I think, a little bit easier of a schedule. They get to host Vanderbilt and then be on the road against South Carolina. I think they can get the job done in both of those games. So I like Georgia's stock. I do not love Texas and Oklahoma right now.
So, yeah, I do have 14 teams in the field right now, Mike, but 3 of them are the last 4 in, and one of them is the 5th to last team in. So 11 seems like a minimum at this point.
Yes.
And 12 or 13 is probably what we're looking at, and all 14 is difficult because they play each other. Obviously, only one team can win, and I did this before yesterday. We did have Wake Forest lose a home game to Virginia yesterday. That essentially knocks them out. So they were my second team out. You can throw them off the board pretty much. But you also had Ohio State pick up a win at USC yesterday. So with Texas losing, Ohio State winning, without doing a projection, you'd have to think that they're right next to each other. You have Boise State winning a lot of games in the Mountain West, but everyone likes to talk about how great this conference race is, and it looks like it is Auburn's now a two-game lead. And while this SEC tournament will be great, definitely the biggest storyline for me is those 4 teams that we mentioned there. They're playing each other, and then, they're going to have to be playing teams that are better than them in their first game in the SEC tournament. So that is by far the biggest storyline for me in the SEC, and unless you got anything else to add, this conference is loaded. That's why a team at 4-11 in the conference is currently in the field.
Yeah.
But they are the right results from losing all of these teams on the bubble. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think right now my prediction for the SEC is 12 teams in the field. The reason I say 12 is you're bound to have a couple of bid stealers. It happens every single year.
Yeah.
Something is going to happen. Something in the West Coast Conference happens. St. Mary's gets dropped. Gonzaga can swing on in there and steal a bid, or Washington State or an Oregon State, someone there. You can look at the Missouri Valley. You could look at the American Conference, where you've got potentially two teams that could get in, but you could have another bid stealer sneak in there and knock out Memphis in the American. It's just bound to happen. There's going to be some bid stealers out there that are going to take some bids away from the SEC, for better or for worse.
And it will be interesting to see, Mike, VCU, as I mentioned earlier, and two of these 12 seeds might be good enough to make it on their own. That's Drake and UC San Diego. UC San Diego's 35th in KenPom and in the 40s in the net. It would be something if
darlings.
It would be something if they were left out. They're going to hope to never find out. But again, if they were to lose, maybe they're in over these SEC teams. They haven't really had to be compared together yet, but yeah, playing at the bubble, it's playing with fire. A bad call goes against you late. You have a half-court shot go against you late. You have a half-court shot go in for another team to steal a bid. That can cost you a chance in the tournament. So the best way to do it is to win enough games and not have to worry, but of course there'll be a ton that do have to worry. Let's go over to the East Coast here, Mike. The ACC, talked about them a little bit earlier. We talked with Duke. They're at the top of the pile right now. They do just have a one-game lead over both Louisville and Clemson. Don't see the Duke losing the rest of the way, honestly. They do go to Chapel Hill to play UNC, but there's three really good teams in this league, and there might be room for a fourth in the tournament.
Yeah, and I think first off, it's worth noting we did not think Louisville or Clemson would be even close to Duke coming down the stretch here. It really is remarkable that there is still some sort of competition for the ACC crown. So really kudos to Louisville and Clemson for making this a tight race. With that being said, North Carolina, they seem to be getting back on track. They've got 4 straight wins. So they've got a golden opportunity at home against one of the best teams in the country to get a win. Who knows? They've also got 2 pretty easy games before then against Miami and Virginia Tech. So they win 3 straight games. All of a sudden,
well, they're in if they win. If they win 3 straight, they're in.
Exactly, and that's another team that I think has got to get in. Wake Forest, they kind of stumbled this past week.
It's going to be tough for them now.
Going to be very tough for them to get in unless they win the conference or get to the conference finals after that loss to NC State on the road.
They do go to Cameron. You could always win there, but it seems unlikely at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then SMU, you look at their body of work. It has been great all the time. They lost to Wake Forest. They lost to Clemson. You kind of felt like they had to win one of those games to be able to prove something because they just don't really have a quality win shot.
Yeah, they have 0 quad 1 wins.
0 quad 1 wins. They've played all the top teams in the conference, and some of them they've competed, but they also got blown out by Duke, got blown out by North Carolina, got blown out by Louisville. So you look at, I just don't think there's enough there for SMU, and they don't really have any tough games left. So SMU, yeah, they might win 3 straight and finish the season 24-7. I don't see anything that would say that SMU is a better program than a Texas or an Oklahoma or any of these teams in the SEC that are on the bubble, or really any of these other teams that are on the bubble. They haven't proven anything. You don't win a quad 1 game.
I think, if you were to look at SMU's resume and not see what team was on it, you'd think it was one of these Drake, UC San Diego resumes. Yep. What will be interesting is if those two end up being compared. Drake, UC San Diego lose, SMU wins a couple games, maybe gets a quad 1 win in the ACC tournament, because none are on the schedule the rest of the way.
Yeah, it won't get one.
Stanford away is interesting because Stanford's like 80th in the net, so Stanford could get to 75, but beating them would cause them to go down. There is a way that can get to quad 1, but I mean, you can't be like backdooring a quad 1 win at this point if you're SMU. SMU is probably in the first 4 out now with Wake Forest losing, and then for North Carolina, they're going to have to beat somebody above them eventually. You wouldn't punish them if they lost to Duke, because Duke is awesome, but that puts a whole lot of pressure on their ACC tournament then. So those three teams probably playing for, I'll say, like a half a spot.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's no way that more than one of them get in, but there is a 5% chance at least that all three, or that team could make it. So ACC is an interesting one. The bottom of the league really stinks, and this tournament does get started a day early on Tuesday now, and every team is playing in this tournament. They are not cutting the relegation zone like some of the other conferences. All right, Mike. Well, unless you got anything else to add on the ACC, let's go down the list to the Big 12. If it would like to load. All right, here we go. Mike, the team up at top, Houston, is my fourth number 1 seed. They are 16-1 in the league. Just a stat that I saw that was pretty funny, or not funny, but tells really how great they are. They did start the Big 12 1-2 last year. They're 32-1 in Big 12 play since. They're winning games at the clip that they were in the American Conference, but this time it's in an elite conference. So they are 3 games ahead. I guess they could share the title with somebody else if they lose out, but they're winning this league, and while this league is pretty good at the top, they are by far the best.
Absolutely, and I think people have compete with Duke and Auburn for a national championship. You look at how tough this team is defensively, how physical they are. I saw them firsthand just completely outbody Baylor a couple. Their only loss right now in the conference is that overtime loss to Texas Tech, which was a hell of a game by Tech. But
and they ended up beating them later.
They just beat them this past week in a game that they were clearly the better team in a tough environment in Lubbock. So they got their revenge. And then, I think they've got 2 more games. The next 2 games, they're probably not going to sweat it out at all against Cincinnati and Kansas. They'll have, a tougher finish to the season when they go to Waco to take on the Bears. Maybe I'm just hopeful that Baylor can get it in gear by then. But Houston is obviously they're a national championship contending team, and it's interesting because a couple of teams that they're up at the top, they're kind of starting to fade a little bit. We've seen Arizona; they're not playing as good a basketball as they once were earlier on in the conference season. They had a loss a couple weeks ago to Kansas State. That was a little bit of an eye scratcher, and then they lost that game against Brigham Young. That was also not a very pretty loss. They also barely knocked off Baylor, so they're not looking as solid right now. I think they'll probably still get a pretty good seed, but Iowa State, that is a team that really seems to be struggling a lot. It's a team that probably 3 weeks ago I would have said they were a Final Four contender. It's hard to see it right now. They're kind of struggling.
Yeah, I just want to throw one stat in for Houston. They're third in defense. Their defense is elite, but they're 8th in offense. That is a little bit different than Sampson's teams over the years.
That is true.
They've lost games in the tournament because they've played elite offenses and they've just been good enough to score on Houston's defense. I think they might be able to win a game or 2 like that this year. They've won games in the 80s. They still do play at a slow tempo, and there are only 2 teams that have less possessions per game than Houston in the country. But they're scoring it at a decent enough rate where that Final Four, I know they've made the Final Four before, but it seems like the Final Four is a real possibility for Houston. And then, Texas Tech is a really good team. But as you go down the line, Mike, into that Tier 1A of the Big 12, there's a distinct flaw with all of them. Arizona played really poorly in the non-conference. There's a little bit here. Iowa State's had some injuries, people in and out. They've lost a couple games in a row. BYU is probably in the ascendancy, but what I want to spend some time on here, Mike, is Kansas. Bill Self and we've alluded to this a number of times, Mike. Last year's Kansas team really fell off a cliff. They didn't have a ton of depth. Seems like that team is very similar to this year's team. They're 19-9. They did go on the road to beat Colorado, who the viewers on YouTube can't even see because they're in last. And they did beat Oklahoma State by a large margin here, but they go 0-2 on their mountain trip, including that heavy loss. Do you think this team is similar to last year's team in the way that they're just not as elite as they usually are under Bill Self?
Yeah, the difference between this Kansas team and last year's Kansas team is Kansas's team last year, they had talent, they just weren't deep. They had McCullers was great. You start to wonder, are these, the Big 12 is no longer Kansas's conference. For about 20 years, it seemed like King Kansas ruled the Big 12, and that's over. They're not even in the top tier of this. They're right now fighting for a 7 seed, something I never thought I'd say under the Bill Self era at Kansas. And look, they've got a good opportunity to prove everyone wrong coming down the stretch. They've got to play Texas Tech, Houston, and Arizona, the 3 best teams in the Big 12. They get to play them coming down the stretch. We'll see what happens. If there's a strong chance, though, that Kansas loses all 3 of these games.
Yeah. And if they leave with 1 win, I'm not sure that they're in any much of a lower spot than they were already.
No, I agree, especially with how good of these teams are playing.
Especially if their losses are close.
Yeah. But you're looking at this Kansas team. You looked at the largest blown lead in school history. That was against Baylor. You look at their loss against Brigham Young. I'm pretty sure that's their worst loss to an unranked team in school history. They've had a lot of bad lows in the month of February. And look, March is just around the corner. So they've got that really impressive win against Iowa State. I'll give them credit with that, but neither of these Colorado wins are particularly impressive. Their home game, they only won by about 12 points. One on the road just now, that wasn't a convincing win. They won by 7. So yeah, we'll see the next week and a half, but I just don't think this Kansas team is all that good. And you start to wonder if Bill Self's expiration date, he's going to be able to stay at Kansas as long as he wants, but his ability to dominate, is it over? I don't know. It might be.
There was a report that he was considering retiring, and he pretty clearly came out and denied that, so it looks like that's not coming anytime soon. But, Mike, we do have another conference to get to here. But, yeah, their resume is still good, even if they lose a couple games here. I can't really see them dropping all that far, despite them not playing good basketball down the stretch. But they did get those 2 wins. They got themselves to 19-9, and there's a way that they're 21-10 going into the Big 12 tournament, and I don't think any of us are picking them to cut down any nets, but I think it could be really for any other fan base, they would be fine with this. Is a solid team. It's nothing special, but this
is Kansas.
But this is Kansas. This doesn't happen, and now it's happened 2 years in a row. Let's move to a little bit further down in the conference, Mike. We've got really 2 teams below Kansas that are in the tournament picture. One of them's West Virginia at 17-11 and 8-9. They're in a pretty good spot. And I wouldn't say tournament lock just yet, but with another win, probably with one more win, they're in the tournament. And then it comes down to Baylor, Mike. The last 10 seed for me, 8-9, 16-12. They had a couple opportunities there. They did beat West Virginia, but 3 losses in a row, Mike, and with 2 non-tournament teams up next, it's getting a little nervy down there in Waco.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming a little unnerving, especially when you look at their losses the last 2 games. A 2-point loss to Colorado, which was a pretty embarrassing loss. They followed that up by failing to get the job done against a Cincinnati team that, quite frankly, is not a very good basketball team. Yes, there is a lot of concern in Waco, especially with their lack of ability to win games on the road. They've got Oklahoma State. If they don't win this game, I think we're hitting the panic button in Waco, Texas. Right? Like, we need Chip and Joanna Gaines to come up and do a fixer-upper on us. But that's a must-win game. And then you go on the road to TCU, and Baylor's only won 3 road games this entire year. So that feels like one. You've got to get that one as well. I think if you get those two, Baylor's comfortable in the tournament. Probably don't have a great seed, but they're comfy, cozy in to March Madness. And then it comes down to, can they have their performance of the season and knock off a good Houston team? Probably not, but yes, things are very concerning in Waco, especially with their lack of height, with Joshua Ojonwuka being out for the rest of the year. Their center is 6'7", and they've got one of them.
And Mike, the ideal situation for Baylor here is to go into that Houston game off 2 victories, not needing a win. And if you win it, great, and you bump a seed line up. But if you were to lose, and you can never totally say, oh, they're out of the field for good, because they could beat 3 good teams in the Big 12 tournament. But it really, this Oklahoma State game, definitely they need to win for a little breathing room. And then TCU, I know it's a rivalry game on the road. I don't know how much a loss there would really affect things. But if you lose that TCU game, they're going to be feeling some pressure against Houston, who will likely, well, not likely, they'll definitely have the title wrapped up by then. So maybe an opportunity to play them when they're not, when something's not really on the line for them. But, you know, the Oklahoma State game, honestly, will probably get them in. But if they lose the next 2 and then a game in the Big 12 tournament, Dayton might be in the future. But I would say this team is definitely trending down. And I don't know if you've got 2 very winnable games here, or as winnable as it gets in the Big 12. Do you want that? Because if you lose them, that's a real devastating blow. Or do you like it because you just have to play solid and you should take care of business? But I guess time will tell with the Big 12. All right, Mike, let's go to the Big East here as we wrap things up. This league has really been the story of one team. That is Rick Pitino and St. John's, 25-4, 16-2. Just 4 quad 1 wins, which is why they're down on the 3 line. But, Mike, there's 4 tournament teams in the Big East.
Yeah, there absolutely are. You wonder if, Xavier or Villanova is going to be able to make a run. I think Georgetown's pretty much out of it unless they win the conference. They had a golden opportunity against UConn, and they competed for most of that game, but foul trouble subdued the Hoyas. At the end of the day, there's 4 tournament teams here, and St. John's is going to really carry the weight of this conference, especially with how much Marquette has slipped. You look at some of these games from St. John's, right? They had that crazy, ridiculously bad choke against Baylor in November. If they win that game, they're 26-3 with an additional quad 1 win. They're easily on the 2 line.
Yeah,
they're really fighting for a 1 seed, but they didn't get that job done. Look, to get a 1 seed, St. John's is going to have to win out.
I actually don't think it's possible.
No,
there's only so many good teams that they can beat, who they've already beat. And it's just they're not really stacking up against the SEC or
Marquette on the road would be huge. If they can get Marquette on the road,
it would,
and then they can get into the Big East tournament and they can beat probably Marquette again, beat UConn. Like that's going to be some more quad 1 wins. They're potentially adding 3 quad 1 wins to their portfolio, but that's the only way that they get in. They can't have any of these other Big East teams like Villanova or Xavier make a run, because beating them does not help their cause.
Xavier is probably in the conversation, probably in the 5th to 8th out range. Villanova just had too weak of a non-conference. They lost to Columbia, who is 240th in Ken Palm. And then in terms of Georgetown, they lost Thomas Sorber, who was, might have been in the conversation for Big East Player of the Year, probably still Big East Freshman of the Year. Maybe McNeely from UConn, but we'll have a awards episode here as really maybe not in between the final regular season game and the conference tournament, because we'll do conference tournament previews then, but maybe before the last game we could do some, our pick for Player of the Year from this conference and stuff to watch out for. The Big East tournament might be interesting, Mike. This is one of the power conferences I would look out for a bid steal. With just 4 tournament teams, like 4 out of 10, like a 6 out of 10 chance. Obviously, the worst 6 teams, but more than half the teams could steal a bid. You don't see that in a power conference very often, but St. John's leading the way at a 3 seed, Marquette at a 6, Creighton at an 8, and UConn at a 10. Now, this is not the year that the Big East was hoping for, and unfortunately, St. John's is paying the price for that, whether that's fair or not. There's a 25-4 team from the Big East. That's usually enough to be a 1 seed, but with everything into consideration, it's likely not going to be. So, Mike, unless you got anything else to add on the Big East, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you got to look out for Villanova in the Big East tournament.
They've had some spirited efforts at MSG when they've needed to.
They have. They can garner it at worst a neutral crowd, at best a home crowd at an MSG because of the population that lives in New York, and they're starting to play a little bit better basketball. So they had that big win against Marquette last Friday. So look out for the Cats to potentially get a big win in the Big East tournament.
Yeah, and they were one of the 2 teams to beat St. John's, and they, it seems like the key for them would be to get to the 5 seed, because the top 5 teams get a bye, and to see if you could beat the 4 and the 1, because they've beaten UConn already once, they've beaten St. John's already once. It's hard to win for the 6 to 10 seed to win the Big East tournament. That's tough. It's just an extra game, and when you're playing fatigued against a team that's better than you, it's just crazier things have happened. But that's not really the way that tournament runs happen. I think one of the teams that's not in the tournament is going to get that 5 seed. They're going to be playing that noon game on Wednesday. Is it? Thank you.
Yeah.
So Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because semis. Oh no, it might be Thursday. Wednesday's the
Quarters
start.
Thursday, semis Friday, final Saturday.
Yeah. So that'll be an interesting one. But if you're wondering what our thoughts are on the Big Ten, you can check out the In a Nutshell podcast. Plenty of Big Ten on the board here, as the viewers can see the bracket projection. Not as many Big East. Obviously, some other conferences in there. Mountain West, you've got an A-10 team, American team in there, but we'll be sure to check on those next time. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Sports Daily College Basketball, and we'll see you next time.